Today we're going to wrap up jQuery UI and possibly get into the beginnings of PHP. Will depends on what the time is. I was going to show you this. I don't know if you received this email or not, but we will be lifting our mandatory mask order while indoors effective Tuesday, March the 1st. However, for those who are unvaccinated, we strongly encourage you to continue wearing masks while indoors. So that's why I'm not wearing a mask today. And I see some of you, I guess all of you got that message as well. All right. At any rate, onward and upward. What I want to look at today is under jQuery UI is, first of all, there are a number of animations that you can perform in jQuery UI. And at least I want you to be aware of them, sort of have an idea of how they look. There's several of things that we have not touched on. Autocomplete, how you can style buttons, checkbox, radio, and so on down the line. And take the time to look at these, because these could very well be useful in upcoming projects you have. We're going to end talking about JavaScript and jQuery either during or after today's class, but that doesn't mean we're really done with JavaScript or jQuery, because anything we do from the rest of the semester is likely to have a JavaScript or jQuery component in it. So you'll get an opportunity to practice and to develop your skills on the later lab assignments when we get into PHP. But there's some cool animations you can do. For example, this one sort of makes an effect where it expands and changes the color of a section of the page. If you view the source, it shows you how to do that. Is creating an on-click function for the button. And it is saying if the button is clicked, then run the effect animate and set the background color to this, which is red, the color to this, which is white, and expand the width to 500 and do it over 1,000 milliseconds, or in other words, 1 second. Otherwise, if it's not clicked, then, or if it's clicked a second time, okay, my mistake, this toggles it. If it's unclicked, it does this. If it's clicked, it does this. If it's already been clicked, it will set it back to the original format with the background white and the color of the text black. So it keeps tracking this little variable called state, and each time through it flips the state from true to false. So this would be something cool to integrate into your programs. And why do we do this? We do this for a couple reasons. First of all, it does tend to make your pages more visually appealing. And that's a consideration, right? I always talk about functionality and making sure the page services the needs of the users and so on. But making your page attractive is a goal as well. And these animations can go a long way into making the page a little more attractive, put a little life into the page, however you want to say it. Another one besides the color animation is easing. Let's see what this is all about. Oh, this is setting a curve. That's, yeah, I don't want to go into that one today. Hide. Again, it comes back, and you can have it come back 2 different ways. You can see that. So you can check this out on your own to do that. The next thing I want to talk about is I want to talk about the theme roller. All right. it can be difficult to style pages on your own. And let me give you an example. I took their tabs example. And first of all, I don't believe it's going to work because there's a couple of bugs in their tabs example. Let's take a look at that. Yeah, it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Well, let's look at the code. It doesn't work because a couple of these links are not defined correctly. All right. This one I believe we can get rid of because that's their custom style. And notice /resources is looking in the web server's home directory in a folder called resources demo styles. Well, since I copied this to my machine, I don't have that obviously, so I can get rid of that. The other thing is it says // code, jQuery, and all that. Well, that also does not work because we're not on that web server, so we have to put HTTPS in front of it. So now when we do this, this ought to work. And it does. All right, so we have our tabs. And you could do something fancy like putting an animation on it if you want. It's not required, but it does tend to make it look a little cooler. All right, now let's say we want to style it. Let's say we want to style this bar in the background to be a different color. I can look at my code and I can say, that bar is a UL. All right, that bar is represented by this UL. So I could put a style on that UL. And for simplicity, I'm going to put the style right on the page, but this would work if it was an external page as well. Or maybe I should say this will also not work if it's an external page as well. So if I put a style on the UL, and I make the background color red, I'm almost certain this is not going to work. You would think that this would take and apply the red to this UL, which corresponds to this on the page. Let's make sure I've saved it. And refresh. Did you notice something happened really quickly? It flashed red for about a split second, but then it went back to the original gray. And why is that? Well, I guess it's important to understand the reason why so that you know how to fix it. But don't be too obsessed by the reason why, as long as you know how to fix it, if that makes sense. These jQuery UI things add classes to your file, to your HTML page, to make the functionality work. All right. So in other words, part of the jQuery scripts, jQuery UI scripts, is to go and find things and add those features to your page. It does that by adding classes to your page that you did not originally code. All right. Let me see if I can show you what I mean by doing the inspect element on this. If I go to Developers Tools and I'm in Elements, notice how that actually got put into our web browser. We don't see it in the source code, because the JavaScript dynamically applied these classes to those elements. So our UL that used to be just a plain old UL in our source code, right? Nothing up our sleeves, just a UL. Because of the jQuery UI stuff, gets added all of these different classes. All right, UI tabs nav, or yeah, UI tabs nav, UI corner all, UI helper reset, UI helper rclair fix, UI widget header. Now, which one of those applies to that UL? I don't know. It's a mess, right? There could be styles written on any or all of those different classes. Where do those styles reside? They reside in this file here, the jQuery theme, the default theme that they created. This is sort of the base theme, the default theme. We could find out where that style comes from by doing inspector. And we see, myself out of the way here, that there is our UL style way down the line. But all these other things have overridden it. So it actually gets it from UI widget header, because that's where the background is set to that color of gray. That's why, if you notice, the style, our style flashed for a split second. All right, because it was in process of adding all these classes dynamically to the elements on our page. So therefore, we see a flash of red, and then it goes, and this, because that class got added to it, it gets this style rule. All right. So the people that made jQuery UI realized this, and they said, let's come up with an easy way that people can change the style without having to like go through all this for every single element. Keep in mind, this is just for this thing right here. If I want to change anything else, the background of this div, the color of the tabs, the color of the tab when it's selected, and all that. If I want to change one of that, I'd have to go through the similar sort of investigation on every single element. And that would really, really, really be difficult. So what do you do instead? You go to their theme roller, where you can go and you can say how you want it displayed. So for example, that's the default in our theme roller. Now, if I want to do this, well, first of all, there's a gallery that I can choose from where there's sort of predefined themes. So I can maybe pick this theme and have it look like that. Or I could pick this theme. If I didn't like this particular theme, let's say I wanted this to be a little bit brighter orange, I could go into edit of that theme, and I could say, give me, for this header of a toolbar, instead of oh, here we go, clickable active state. Instead of this, I could change it to screwed something up. Oh, there we go. I could change that to be a different color. Let's say I can make it my color red here. And there, it makes it red. Had me worried for a second. I think I accidentally clicked back to roll your own. All right. And you can do that for each one of those elements. So corner radius, 4 pixels. I could make it wider curved by putting in a larger number there. And there my tabs and the header bar have a much greater curve, and this has a much greater curve, and so on down the line. If you play around with this, you can figure out what controls what and make it look the way that you want to. So you can either pick a theme that they have defined, or you can click here and roll your own based on the default theme when you initially go to the page. Actually, roll your own takes whatever it was set to, and then you can change all those things. But if you remember, when you first came to this page, it starts out with the default theme, and then you could go and make all the changes. Or you could pick one of their themes, or you could pick one of their themes and alter it. So you have a number of choices here. So I'm going to go, because spring seems like it's right around the corner, and I know that's probably foolish to say, but it's March 1st, so what the heck. I'm going to pick this. I want this theme. When you have the theme that you want, you can press download. Or if you have gone and set your own by making changes, you can press download. Either way. It asks you for the version that you want. We're using 1.13.1, so that's the version that we want. It's showing us all the things that we want to download from it. And it gives you the name of the theme. And this allows you to put a CSS scope to limit your theme to a particular portion of the page. But we're going to use it for the whole page, so I'm going to click download. Not downloading anything. Oh, we encountered an error. There we go. I can put it on the desktop. And unzip it. And I get essentially a default page that shows me how to use that theme. So if I go to view this default index.html, there we see what our components look like. So in order to use this on our page, we go in here. And we can copy this line and just make sure that it's in the same folder as our web page. And it's on the desktop, so I'm going to make sure it's in the same folder as the desktop. And I'm going to put it after the default theme. I save this, and the page should look like it did before with the new theme associated with that. And it doesn't. You're right. I grabbed the wrong thing. Thank you. Good eye. There we go. And now we have the theme that we wanted. Yeah, important that you grab the right file. I'll tell you, if you go to the trouble of making your own theme, I think on one of the assignments it's required, but going forward, if you use jQuery UI, and even in other classes of mine, if you stray from the defaults and make your own CSS or theme, it's going to put me in a much better mood when I'm grading. That can't help but help you, right? All right. There we go. Any questions about this? These are just a few additional things associated with jQuery UI. Right? Now, we're going to go back and revisit what we talked about in the beginning of the semester. All right. Let me see if there's another diagram. Let's look at this one. So far, we have been dealing with this scenario. All right. Where the client, who is anyone with a browser, all right, could be a person at a desktop, a laptop, a phone, a gaming device, anything that's connected to the internet and can ask for web pages is what I mean by a browser. It makes a request that makes it to the web server. I generally draw a cloud right here to indicate that that request goes through the internet, makes it to the web server. The web server retrieves the files that are necessary, such as pre-created HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and other files like images and maybe audio, maybe video, whatever. And that gets sent back to the browser. This is the sort of the formula for a static web page. Okay? A static web page means it doesn't change. In other words, if I took what I did today, all right, with that green tab, and I saved it, and I brought it back up the last day of class, it's going to look exactly the same. Why? Because the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in there are static, right? They're pre-written, they do their job, but they're not dynamic based on anything. What do I mean by dynamic? I mean it changes. It could change by any number of factors. It could change based on user input. It could change based on your location. It could change based on the platform that you're using. It could change based on the time of day. All these things come into play with a dynamic website. And in the case of a dynamic website, you don't have these static files out there sitting and waiting. You instead have on this end, on the web server's end, a program. Let's see if we can find a good one here. I sort of decided very early on in the semester that me trying to draw on a whiteboard was not the way to go. Okay, let's look at this one. A little blurry, all right. One thing I do not like about this is, again, it doesn't show the cloud to indicate that it goes through the internet. But the client makes a request, it goes through the internet, the web server, which in this case they're saying is Apache, which is one of the most popular web servers, all right, but there are other web servers as well. Specifically, there is Microsoft's IIS, goes and takes that request, and instead of delivering a file, it can go and execute a PHP program. And that PHP program may integrate with the database and then return an HTML document back to the user. Now, here's a key concept to remember. In both cases, client gets back an HTML page. And when I say HTML, I mean HTML with CSS, with JavaScript, with all those client-side things that we've talked about. All right? The difference is, in a static page, those pages are pre-written and are simply sitting out there waiting for someone to request them, and then they get delivered. Whereas with a server-side page, what's out there is not a completed web page, but a script, a program for a web page that will take and create an HTML document from the instructions that are in that page. All right? And then that gets delivered. Now, there's an important implication about this for you running and testing your programs. First of all, that means that you can no longer just double click on your files and open them up in the browser and see what the page looks like, right? Because PHP files are not finished web pages. They're recipes for a web page. Therefore, if you try to open it up in a browser, you're going to open up the recipe, all right? It'd be like trying to eat a page out of a cookbook, right? That's not satisfying. A cook has to take that recipe, take those instructions, and bring them to life. In the same way, a web server has to take those instructions and bring the page to life and actually make an HTML document. All right? And that's what happens on the web server side when it grabs the PHP. Maybe the PHP integrates with the database and then produces an HTML page. The kinds of things you typically do on the server side are trying to think of the right adjective for them. Bigger things, more complex things. All right. We would not want every client to integrate directly with the database. Not sure if that's possible, and if it's possible, we wouldn't want to do it anyhow. All right. We want control over that. That's a security thing. We want to control how our database is accessed. All right. Plus, we only have to have the software that can access the web server only on one machine, the server. All right? Because the client is going to be getting back HTML. The client is not going to get back PHP scripts. Communicating with other computers, like checking with the credit card service to see if your credit card is valid or not. That would be done server side. All right, that's sort of a higher stakes, I guess, is my best word that I can think of. Because in the case of client-side scripting, that can actually be manipulated by the user or circumvented. And if it's something like just making a menu appear or disappear, that's not as huge of a deal as falsifying a credit card information. All right, so higher stakes things typically we do on the server side. So let's look at our first PHP example. Now, there's sort of like a good news, bad news thing here. The good news is that PHP pretty much follows the same sort of syntax that we have in JavaScript, right? How do we write a if statement in JavaScript? We write it like this. All right. We'd write it something like that. How do we write a comparable script in PHP? It's going to be very nearly the same except for one thing. Our variables are preceded by a $sign. But as you can see, the rest of the syntax is identical. If, condition in parentheses, braces to indicate true or false. Likewise, there can be an else for both of them. Same thing with PHP. Same thing for loops, same thing for mathematical expressions. Most of the things are the same. This is, I think, called the ECMA standard for programming languages, which is sort of like the same sort of syntax we use in Java, C#, and so on for the most part. But there's one difference, all right? And that difference relates to how we communicate with the web page. And the difference is based on the nature of how these scripts integrate with web pages. JavaScript is used to manipulate an already existing web page. All right? Change the color of this. Make this visible or invisible. However we're going to do it. That's what JavaScript does. PHP is involved in actually creating the web page. All right? It gets a request for a web page, and PHP scripts run and actually create the web page. All right? And for that reason, it's difficult. It's different. All right? Not necessarily difficult. If a JavaScript script wants to update a portion of the web page, it can find that element and access the inner HTML and add to it or change it or whatever. In the case of PHP, if we want to send something, update the page and send something, we just simply send it to the page with a print command to say, put at this point in the page these things. There's no such thing as forms in PHP land. All right. There's either query string elements or values in the form collection, but we're not pulling things out of a text box or a radio button or a drop down. We're pulling things out of either a set of values out of either the query string or the form collection. So let's look at our first example. Let's say I wanted to create a page that showed me the squares of numbers. In other words, 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9, and so on down the line. First thing I'm going to do is I wrote these PHP scripts. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to copy them into my web server. And for this particular web server, the location is CINET pub www root. Now, I would guess most of you don't have IIS. Most of you do not have IIS installed. All right. This is something, it's asking for admin, and I don't have admin permissions. So I can't do that. It's a continuing case of frustration for me that they don't allow me admin permissions. Well, we'll look at the code without being able to run it. All right, which I know is not going to be good. Let's say we wanted to write a page that showed the squares of numbers from 1 to 100. All right. I could write a page with just a static HTML table that said 1 squared equals 1, 2 squared equals 4, 3 squared equals 9, and so on down the line. All right. Now, the problem with that is that's 100 rows. And if I'm doing 100 math problems like that, there's a good chance I'm going to mess up. Even if I use a calculator, I might type in 81 plus 80 or times 80 instead of 81 times 81. You know, computers compute. That's their purpose. Therefore, we need to be able to access that capability to compute values and have our page be created. So what this script does is this script goes and everything that you see enclosed in here is a PHP instruction. It's not static HTML. Where I say print is where it's writing that tag to the web page. Where is it writing that tag? Immediately following this H1. It's outputting the table tag. It then prints a header, a row containing 2 headers for number and squared. Then it has for $n equals 1, $n less than or equal to 100, and plus plus. Well, remember in PHP, as I mentioned before, the $ indicates that you have a variable. Let me go really quick because this is really bugging me. Let me go really quick to see if I can get our tech guy to change permission. Talk among yourself for about let's see, you're being recorded, by the way. So if you're in the witness protection program or something, cover your face. So I go to copy, go to here, try to paste. There you go. All right, thank you. Okay. And make the change for next time? Yeah. Okay. Okay, thank you. All right, so we saw the code for this. What this is going to do is it's going to loop through 100 times. It's going to take the value of our loop counter, square it, and then output, but not just output the result. It's going to output the result as part of a table row, as part of a table tag. So let's go and run this. We had to put it there because it has to be processed by a web server, and that's where my web server is expecting those files. I have instructions about installing XAMPP on your machines, and that'll put them in a different folder, but the idea is still the same. Now to access it, on this machine, you type in localhost and the name of the page. And there's our page, all the way up through 100. From 1 to 100. If we look at the output of that, if we view the page source, we see all those tags that our script created. Here's a table tag that was created by this print. Here is the TR and TH and other TH. That's this line. Then finally, we have for 1 to 100, we've created a table row, a TD with the number, a TD with the number squared, and finally we print the end table tag. Now this is almost a tip-off that this is written by a script, right? Because there's no like line breaks or indentation or anything like that, all right? Remember, as a programmer, you're going to be debugging not the HTML that was generated, but you're going to be debugging the PHP script. And this is a script that does it. Output that tag, output that tag. Our for loop that outputs a table row. And then finally, when we're all done with the loop, output an end table tag. Now, anything between the start and end PHP is PHP code and is not HTML. Now, there's an alternate way to do this. And that's covered in the second example. Second example looks like the first, right? But the coding style is a little bit different. In this example, I code the table in HTML, and I code the end table in HTML. I only code the for statement in PHP, and I encode the statement to print out the values in PHP. The point of this being is that you can mix the PHP and HTML any way that makes sense to you. All right? Now, that's a good thing and a bad thing. This can be confusing to people, all right? Because notice that I start the for statement here, I end the for statement there. And I have PHP blocks for both of those because what's in between, for the most part, is HTML with a little swatch of PHP here, here, and here. So these two things do the same thing, but they're coded. So you can use the PHP to only do the dynamic stuff, or you can use the PHP to also output some static HTML if you want to, simply by using the print command. All right. Again, though, if I simply try to double click on this page, oh, there we go. If I try to open it with the browser, I don't get good results. Why? Because this is just a recipe. It has to be run through a server for it to work. And simply by opening up the file, that's not running it through a server. Plain old HTML pages, we can do that because they're ready to go. But PHP pages, we have to run through a server to make them ready to go. We'll cover this more next time. I realize that this is a little rushed and we were interrupted for a spot, but we'll cover this again next time and go into more details. Next week, I think for the next 2 weeks, your challenge is to install a web server on your machine, and XAMPP is used for that. And there's instructions on how to do it. And then understand these basic PHP, because we're going to be doing more PHP fun stuff in the upcoming weeks. All right. Are there any questions? All right. We'll see you over in lab.